All right, so like I said, we're doing cybersecurity resilience, which is talking about a lot of plans. So business continuity. So, and these are very important. And if you get good at them, you can make quite a bit of bank. And I will say that I actually used one of these for my capstone for my master's degree. So they are valuable. Business continuity is an organization's ability to maintain operations after a disruptive event. A business continuity plan, or BCP, is a strategic document that provides alternative modes of operation for business activities. Creating a BCP involves the following: identifying exposure to threats, creating preventative and recovery procedures, and testing those procedures to determine if they are sufficient. Now, usually when you do this, they just want you to provide ideas, not actually test them. So if you're working for a company, tell them, yeah, that's great, but you actually have to test these. Sorry, cat. Test these out to make sure they work. A BCP generally has 3 goals: business recovery planning, crisis management and communications, and disaster recovery. A BCP should have the following elements: high availability, scalability, diversity, on-prem, and cloud. Continuity of operations, COOP, I just think that's hilarious for some reason, is a federal initiative that to encourage organizations to address how critical operations will continue under a broad range of negative circumstances. That's just because there's a whole subsection of people that really don't like thinking about things like that. So they just kind of go, can't see it, can't see it, can't see it. So you want to just circumvent those types of personalities with these types of documents. A BAA is a business impact analysis. It identifies business functions and quantifies the impact a loss of these functions may have on business operations. These range from impact on property, which are considered tangible assets, impact on finance, monetary funding, impact on safety, physical protection, impact on reputation, status, impact on life, well-being. The BIA will help determine the mission essential functions, which is the activity that serves as the core purpose of the enterprise. Now, don't be surprised if you have more than one mission essential function. Try to get down to as few as possible. I think the one that I had when I did mine, I ended up with 2 or 3 is what I ended up with. BIA can also help with the identification of critical systems that support the mission essential function, identifying a single point of failure, which is a component or entity in a system that will disable the entire system should it no longer function. Cat, that's my leg, don't use it for a scratching post. Minimizing these single failure points results in high availability. So a big part of this of a BIA is looking for those single points of failure and trying to remove them or circumvent them. DRP, which is what I created. I created a disaster recovery plan for my department because they had them for like the whole district, but they didn't have one department specific, which I thought was a huge oversight, because why would you not have a disaster recovery plan for an IT department? It just made me cringe. So that's what I did for my capstone. And luckily enough, my boss was like, yes, please do all the things. They didn't particularly like some of the stuff that came out of that, because I showed them there was a lot of things that we should be doing that we weren't. And sometimes when you do these documents, you may not be the most popular person at first, but usually when you say, look, I can save you money, then you become popular. So keep that in mind. So your DRP focuses on protecting and restoring information technology functions. It's a written document detailing process for restoring IT resources following a disruptive event. And now those disruptive events, like I had a table that said, these are the possible likely events, and then a low, medium, high of this is a low likelihood, this is a medium likelihood, this is a high likelihood. So that's what I used. Yeah, they actually do make cybersecurity insurance now, but you can't cover every single thing with that. Comprehensive in scope, a DRP is intended to be a detailed document that's updated regularly. And that's usually where people get in trouble. They don't update them. Most DRPs cover a common set of topics. One common topic is the sequence in restoring systems or order of restoration. This means which systems should have priority and be restored before the other systems. Fault tolerance refers to a system's ability to deal with malfunctions. The solution to fault tolerance is to build in redundancy, but a lot of times they don't want to do that because it can be expensive, which is the use of duplicated equipment to improve the availability of a system. A goal is to reduce a variable known as the mean time to recovery, or MTTR, which is the average amount of time that it will take to a device to recover from a failure that is not a terminal failure. And there's your key there. If it's a terminal failure, it's dead, Jim. You can't recover it. Redundancy planning can involve redundancy for the following: endpoints, servers, disks, networks, power, sites, and data.
See, we had our redundancy, because we only were a department. Our redundancy consisted of making sure we had a ready-made hard drive that could be so we'd have one that we'd practice on, we'd have one that was set up and ready to go, and then we'd have our primary hard drives, but we'd have 3 sets of everything and one that could always be switched in, so if anything went wrong we could pull the damaged one or whatever was wrong with it, and then
Just pop it right
the
in.
likely. Yep.
Yeah, and that it's funny because they call those are hot swappable, and they have like a whole section that's called like hot swapping and cold site swap. And when it comes to that, so that's preferable is having something that you can immediately just swap over. So that's a good practice, is to have something like that. So endpoints. The downtime from a user's endpoint is not as critical as it is for servers, disks, and networks. In the event of a software issue, many operating systems have a feature known as revert to known state, which is possible to roll back the clock on the OS and restore it to an earlier point. To protect an endpoint from malware infections, programs are available that can freeze a computer to prevent it from accepting any changes from malware. This makes the computer non-persistent. Servers play a key role in network infrastructure. The loss of one or more servers can have a significant business impact. Clustering consists of combining 2 or more devices to appear as a single unit. A server cluster is the combination of 2 or more servers that appear as a single server, connected through public and private cluster connections. Types of server clusters are, just like when we were talking about cryptography, asymmetric and symmetric. In an asymmetric server cluster, a standby server performs no function except to be ready if needed, like your hard drive. All servers do useful work in a symmetric server cluster. If one server fails, remaining servers take on the failed server's work. Virtualization has impacted the number of server clusters that are needed for server redundancy in disaster recovery. Tools are available so that as one virtual machine is shut down, a copy of that virtual machine is automatically launched, or what is called replication, and you can use that instead. So this is just an example of what a server cluster looks like. You can see your clients, public cluster connection, server 1, server 2, and then you have your shared disk. Disks, I will say, I got to see a really terrible thing happen to a former business, and I really wish I hadn't been right, but I said, You really need to have availability so that if you have basically two disks, it was a RAID configuration. And what happens if two disks happen to have catastrophic failure in a RAID configuration? You're toast. And I tried to tell them you need to make sure that you have offsite backups and, all the things we've been talking about, but they decided it was too expensive. Then they had two catastrophic failures with disks with critical information with exactly what I told them was going to happen. And I really hate doing the "I told you so" at a later date. But it breaks my heart to see them have to do stuff like that, because I'm like, well, now it's going to cost you a whole heck of a lot more because you have to have specialized tools and all sorts of stuff. But a lot of times they aren't willing to listen to you until they go through one severe, terrible, catastrophic failure and then go, maybe we should listen to their professionals. So don't be surprised if you were ignored until something bad happens. So disks. Two hardware redundancies for disks that store data are RAID and SAN multipath. A trend in data storage is to use SSDs, or solid state drives. They are more resistant to failure and are considered more reliable than traditional HDDs. HDDs are often first components to fail. Some organizations keep spare hard drives on hand. Mean time between failures measure, hold on one second. Sorry, my cat was driving me nuts. Mean time between failures measure the average time until a component fails and must be replaced. MTBF can be used to determine the number of spare hard drives an organization should keep. Now, the only problem that you have there is if you run into bean counters or people that think they know better than you, when you try to give them, variable rates and say, this is best practice, and they go, is it really best practice? Because we don't want to spend that money. And then I believe that's exactly what happened. They just decided, no, we don't want to spend the money.
But the bean counters get nice bonuses based on how much money they save the company.
And that's exactly what happened. And then they got into a lot of trouble at a later date. Yep. So redundancy array of independent devices, or RAID, uses multiple hard disk drives to increase reliability and performance. RAID can be implemented through software or hardware and has several levels that exist. RAID level 0, striped disk array without fault tolerance, striping partitions hard drive into smaller sections. Data written to the stripes is alternated across the drives. If one drive fails, all data on that drive is lost. So this is what it looks like on your RAID 0. As you can see, it goes A, B, C, D, and you can see it just kind of all over the different drives. So if you say you lose disk 2, then there you go, you're done. So this is not a common one that's used, RAID 0, for large server farms. RAID 1, disk mirroring involves connecting multiple drives to the same disk controller card. An action on primary drive is duplicated on other drive. Primary drive can fail and data will not be lost. Disk duplexing is a variation of RAID level 1. Separate controller cards are used for each disk, and it protects against controller card failures. RAID level 5, independent disks with distributed parity. This has error checking across all drives. Data stored on one drive and its parity information is stored on another. So this is RAID level 1, and you can see it mirrors. So there's A, B, 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 and you can see that's what it would look like with the mirroring. And this is RAID 5. And you can get very, very complicated with these. Yeah, that's, I hammered and hammered on backups. I hammered on offsite backups. I hammered on, because I've seen it happen to multiple companies that I've worked with, where they've had either a problem wasn't caught and they were not keeping enough backups, and so they overrode a backup, not realizing they would need the backup. Backups are highly important, and really not enough people and not enough companies pay attention the way that they should. So that is something that I think we as IT professionals need to push, to let them know it's really important. Do you like your data? Do you want your data to stay, where it's supposed to be? Then maybe you should do this, So a SAN, or a storage area network, this is a dedicated network storage facility that provides access to data storage over a high-speed network. SANs consolidate different storage facilities such as disk array, tape libraries, and optical jukeboxes. Different storage facilities appear as a single pool of locally attached devices. Multipath is a technique for creating more than one physical path between devices and a SAN. Multipath can also assist with increasing the speed of a SAN by spreading connections across multiple paths. Okay, networks. Now, are there any, I think I missed a couple here on the comments. Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of only learning until you get burned on some of these. And our job is to try and get through to people so they don't get burned. But unfortunately, there's a certain amount that don't ever learn until they get burned. Okay, networks. Redundant networks may be necessary due to critical nature of connectivity today. A redundant network waits in the background during normal operations and uses replication scheme to keep live network information current. The redundant network launches automatically in the event of a disaster. Hardware components are duplicated. Virtual software-defined networks, SDN, controllers can increase network reliability and may lessen the need for redundant equipment. The NIC can be configured for redundancy, called NIC teaming, and provides redundancy as well as faster performance. Now, there are more and more, especially with cloud computing, and people are really used to hire. Oh, I don't know if you guys have met this guy. This is, I call him Little Dude. He's one of my most recent additions. He's very sweet. But people are used to high network speeds now. So users don't put up with slow network connection speeds the way that they used to. So having something go down, you will have users start screaming at a much faster rate than they used to. So you're seeing things like these redundant networks and software NICs and things like that a lot more in practice than you used to.
You say that, and it's ironic because I've been one of the people that's gotten screamed at, and one of the people who's been annoyed with someone else because the network is down. And I still remember, and I didn't even think about it until you mentioned it, but I still remember dial-up. So
yeah, same. I've been on both sides of that, and unfortunately, having worked on help desks at a university and being a help desk supervisor, and there's nothing quite as belittling as working on a help desk and having a whole bunch of people call and scream at you about the same thing, especially if it's, I'm sorry, I can't do anything, the network is down, and there's nothing you can do. Users just do not put up with it the way that they did 5-10 years ago. Because we're all used to our home internet. I have fiber now at home, and you expect your work machines, at least most people do, to be on par or faster than your home network. And if it's not, reliable and consistent, they scream. So yeah, it's very important. And yeah, I do remember dial-up. I remember having to, screams and dial-up. Dial-up was just an entire type of screaming. It was terrible. Yeah. Okay, power. Maintaining power is essential when planning for redundancy. Critical devices can be fitted with dual power supplies in case a power supply fails. An uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, is a device that maintains power to equipment in the event of an interruption or primary electrical power source. An offline UPS has the following characteristics. Its least expensive, simplest solution is charged by main power supply, begins supplying power quickly when primary power is interrupted, and switches back to standby mode when primary power is restored. Okay, now I have a couple of interesting stories on this. When I worked with the university, I got to see them switch to a much larger UPS. So because power is such a huge deal, when I was there, I worked in their operations center, and they said, you know, technically you don't have to come in, but if you want to come in and see them rip everything out and watch what happens as they upgrade this UPS to, basically it was a dual configuration they went to, where they had to pull up, because they had the drop floors there. So they pulled everything out, and they had to work with the city to put in, and a bunch of electrical contractors. And it was just insane, the size of the power cables and everything. And this was just, you know, our local university. So if you think about some place like your Micron facility that's going in out there, and the size of what they're going to have to put in, it's insane. And if you ever get a chance to look at some of that, worth it. It's crazy. But also, just even our local school district here, we had UPSs in our main section. All of our IT computers were eventually upgraded, and this I do miss. We had 10 gigabit connections. They had a UPS that hooked directly into our generator. So even if the power went off for everyone else, it didn't go off for us. So I do miss that very, very much for my home computer. And yeah, military, if you ever want to see something like that, military is definitely going to be the way to go. They will have a ton of different things. They always have huge amounts of power and generators and mobile, a lot of their stuff. In fact, the mobile generators and things like that we use in the civilian world, they start as military and then eventually get declassified so that they can be used for civilians. An online UPS, this one's an always running off its battery power while main power runs the battery charger. It is not affected by dips or sags in voltage, and it can also serve as a surge protector. A UPS can only supply power for a limited amount of time. A backup generator can be powered by diesel, natural gas, or propane, and they include automatic transfer switches that can detect the loss of a building's primary power and switch to the backup generator. Now, because we backed up next to the bus garage, which had diesel pumps for the buses, we had a diesel generator, so that was kind of nice. Recovery sites. Okay, so these are sites, backup sites that may be necessary if flood, hurricane, and other major disaster damage to buildings. One thing that I put in my DRP that you don't see as much in some areas, cold. Idaho, we have things like freezing pipes, winter storms. We had, snow days in which people had to go, may or may not have been able to get into the buildings. Below 20 below zero things that we had to put in there into the DRP, which you don't necessarily have to put in other plans. Those are things that you have to put in for that as well. There are 3 types of redundant sites: hot, cold, and warm. A hot site is generally run by a commercial disaster recovery service and has the following characteristics. They duplicate it is just basically a full duplicate of your production site, has all your needed equipment, data backups, can be moved quickly to the hot site. Now, the reason they're usually run by a commercial DRP, like a disaster recovery service, is because unless you're working for a very high level place like HP or someplace that has natural buildings that you can roll these over to, most people just don't have the money or facilities to create a hot site offhand. So they use these services to create them for them. So a cold site provides office space, but the customer must provide and install all your equipment needed to continue operations. There's no backups immediately available. It's a lot less expensive than a hot site, but it takes longer to resume full operations. A warm site has all the equipment installs, but no active internet or telecommunications facilities. No current data backups, less expensive than a hot site. Time to turn on connections and install backups can be half a day or more. So a lot of places opt for the cold or warm site, depending on how much money they have. Data. A data backup is copying information to different medium and storing it so it can be used in the event of a disaster. Backing up data involves data backup calculations, creating different types of data backups, and storage of backups. Two elements are used in the calculation of when backups should be performed. Recovery point objectives is the maximum length of time organizations can tolerate between backups. Then there's recovery time objective. This is the length of time it will take to recover backed up data. Types of data backups, that software that is used to create backups can internally designate which files have already been backed up by selecting an archive bit in the properties of the file. So here's your example. Monday, file changed, file backed up, and you can see Tuesday, file not changed, so you don't need to back it up. So that's just an example of what an archive bit looks like. A more comprehensive backup technology is known as continuous data protection, or CDP. CDP performs continuous backups that can be restored immediately. It maintains a historical record of all changes made to data. CDP creates a snapshot of the data like a reference marker. Now, this can be really nice, and something similar to this is like when you have shadow copy turned on. I don't know if you've ever used shadow copy, but the one that I previously used, and it was a lifesaver for a number of people. It would create snapshots every 12 hours, 6 to 12 hours. And then you could restore previous versions of file folders and files of things that were saved on the server. It was fantastic because I don't know how many times people were like, so-and-so got into the shared file and deleted everything. And you're like, ah, and everyone panic around and you're like, okay, but I can go back and get it from like 6 hours ago. And it made a huge difference. And this is
quick question.
Yep.
On the continuous. Some reason, like when I'm imagining this, I'm imagining like you say it says continuous, so I'm imagining like the moment something changes and data changes in the network, it automatically logs it and stores it. Would that mean if you had some sort of attack, it would have that log and stored there in the backups as well?
You know, I'm not sure on CDP how it works as compared to shadow copy, because there has to be a backup created. I mean, a reference point created somewhere. But usually when they do that, they are hashed. Those portions are hashed and encrypted. But yeah, sorry, I just saw a comment there. So yeah, I would have to do more research on CDP because it's more of a recent one that I'm not quite as familiar with. But yeah, I'm betting you're probably right. There's more than likely a way to go and look for the historical record and itself. And if you're a real jerk and you attack, you could probably corrupt that and go for it. Storing backups. Most organizations store their offsite backups using an online cloud repository. This has gotten very popular. These sites often use CDP to continually back up data. There are several internet services that provide similar features to these. automatic continuous backup, universal access, delayed deletion, online or media-based restoration. Most security experts recommend a 3-2-1 backup plan. And this is what I'm talking about with the 3-2, what I suggest, but often they ignore. And the plan said there should always be 3 different copies of backups on at least 2 different storage media, and one of the backups should be stored in a different location. And I have a horror story on that one to tell you in a minute. So that means you should have 3 different copies. So you should have, like, whether they use tape drives, which I don't see very often, whether you use physical hard drives or you use cloud storage or whatever. It has to be 2 different types of media and 1 backup that needs to be stored offsite, which is what I'm talking about. In the case that I ran into, offsite was in the trunk of someone's car. This is not a viable storage location. For the love of God, don't do this. Make sure that it is a secure offsite location. This is why you have people come in and do what do you call it? Just security overviews to be like, yes, this is good. No, this is bad. And when I heard that, I didn't laugh, but I wanted to. So yeah, it's in a one of those, what do you call it, those fireproof safes, and those so and so's trunk is what it turned out to be. And I was like, say what now? So I said, well, that needs to change, and that needs to change right now. So yeah, that is a legitimate, that's an actual story. It was granted several years ago, but still, it was horrifying when I heard about it. Knowledge check. Which type of disk drive redundancy uses separate controller cards for each disk and duplicates the contents of one disk to a second disk? Disk striping, disk mirroring, disk duplexing, distributed parity. Do not feel bad if you don't recognize this. These can be very difficult. Okay. So disk duplexing is a version of disk mirroring that requires that separate controller card. RAID is one of those things that I have a tendency to use flashcards on right before a test, and then I have a tendency not to remember it unless I look it up. It's just, there are so many, very many different versions of it, so don't be surprised if you don't remember. Just know where to look it up and use flashcards on it right before your test. Okay, a policy. This is a document that outlines specific requirements or rules that must be met and generally has the following characteristics. Communicates a consensus of judgment, defines appropriate behavior for users, identifies what tools and procedures are needed, provides directives for human resources action in response to inappropriate behavior, may be helpful if it is necessary to prosecute violators. Types of security policies. Okay. Account management policy. Now, there are policies and there's procedures, so remember that. Account management policy. Account management involves restrictions regarding user accounts. Managing login credentials can be accomplished by setting technology restrictions regarding the creation and use of passwords. In Microsoft Windows environment, control over user and computer accounts can be set through group policy, and it will save you a lot of time. Microsoft's Directory Service Manager Active Directory can also be used to enforce account management policies. An access policy allows a network administrator to create account permissions and restrictions based on role-based access control scheme. A growing set of enforcement technologies is based on the accumulation and analysis of real-time data that is processed in the cloud. Mobile device location-based policies. Policies can also enforce what mobile devices can access or perform based on the location of the device. The technologies for identification and enforcement include the following: geolocation, geotagging, or geofencing. Personnel policies, separation of duties, requires that if a fraudulent application of a process could potentially result in a breach of security, the process should be divided between 2 or more individuals. See what I mean about it gets a little dry? Policies and procedures can be a little dry, but if you're good at them, you can make a lot of money. Job rotation, this is a big one, and this is also a really good one for circumventing the insider threat. Job rotation involves preventing one individual from having too much control. It also can help you figure out who an insider threat is. If you have someone rotating job duties frequently, I mean, I wouldn't say frequently because that can suck for that person, but you don't have the same high amount of power over one area that can go unnoticed. Whereas if they're having behaviors that might indicate an insider threat, you'll notice those behaviors start to pop up in those other areas. So advantage of job rotation, it limits the amount of time individuals are in a position to manipulate security configuration, and it helps expose any potential avenues for fraud by having multiple individuals with different perspectives learn about the job and uncover vulnerabilities. Mandatory vacation. Boy, you would really like to see this happen a lot more in America, but it's not something that happens a lot here. An audit of the employee's activities is usually scheduled while they are away. Clean desk policy, also not something you see a lot here, is designed to ensure that all confidential or sensitive materials are removed from users' workspace and secured when the items are not in use. If you're in a high security environment, however, you will see that one enforced. Least privilege means that only the minimum amount of privileges necessary to perform a job or function should be allocated. Onboarding and offboarding. I cannot make this big enough deal about this. I got to see what happened when this was not done correctly, and it was a mess. So employee onboarding refers to the tasks associated with hiring a new employee. Background check and employee non-disclosure agreements are typically part of that step. Also included in onboarding is like your account creation and all the stuff that gives them access to the new systems and everything like that. That should be part of your onboarding. Employee offboarding entails actions to be taken when employees leave an enterprise, backing up their employee files, archiving email, forwarding email to manager, disabling the employee's accounts. That one right there if you don't have good employee offboarding and you don't realize that you haven't disabled that employee's account and you quite possibly have someone that could be an issue and you leave that account open, ooh, that is a big security risk. So those are employee offboarding that should be written into your personnel policies. An acceptable use policy. Sorry, did someone say something?
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, like, I actually have a funny story about, actually not really a funny story, but a story about insider threats and kind of like what kind of damage they could do.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure if I told this one before, but we had a employee who he's kind of disgruntled with everything, and we work on a service desk. And I mentioned this the other day. He actually went to a tech lead's computer, like remoted into it, and stole a bunch of tools that is supposed to be at the tech lead level, including tools that are still in development. And since he was like disgruntled, he doesn't want to do anything. He started using that to like, actually mess with other employees, like actually shut down their computers in the middle of calls.
Oh my gosh.
And actually mess with the customers' computers too. And like mid call, like this happened like one night, and he just hung up on a customer and just walked out and quit on spot. And yeah, so they kind of started looking at people's privileges after that, and because they found out what he's doing after looking at his logs and whatnot.
We're like, this might be an issue, and started looking through in his stuff and found it.
Yeah. So
yeah, that is the type of person that you don't want to see in IT, but it does happen. Acceptable use policy. Now, I have yet to work for a place that does not have this. However, a well-written acceptable use policy is very important. This is a policy that defines actions users may perform while accessing systems and networking equipment. That includes employees, vendors, contractors, and visitors. Typically covers computer use, including mobile devices. Usually provides explicit prohibitions regarding security and proprietary information. Unacceptable use may also be outlined by the AUP. A lot of times they will have, like, for example, they'll have, usually during that onboarding process, you have an acceptable use policy that you have to sign if you are required to use networking and things like that. And it will outline, here's acceptable, here's unacceptable, here's what happens if you do the unacceptable. At least that's what I've seen. Organizational policies. Several policies relate to the management and functioning of the organization. Change management, change control, and asset management. Asset management is very important. If you don't track your assets, if you have to have an audit, you can't find anything. If you don't track your assets, they can walk out the door and you never find them again. So keep that in mind. Data policies, data classification policy is written policy that addresses assigning labels to databases and data based on their importance. Data governance policy is a series of formal guidelines regarding the data itself. And then there's also a data retention policy, which specifies how long data should be retained after it has fulfilled its initial purpose. A lot of times data retention policies are also bound to government guidelines on how long things have to be kept.
Data retention policy is a huge thing in the medical industry.
Yeah, exactly. Medical industry. When I worked for the forensics lab, we had a huge data retention policy based on case types. Obviously, anything that was a homicide, we had to keep forever and ever because they could be opened back up. There were, basically a lot of them had medical type stuff because we dealt with blood and urine. And so technically there was HIPAA violatable stuff on there. So we had to keep hard records and electronic. There are all sorts of tables out there for state and federal that show the types of data and how long you are required to keep them. And what was that about asset management, Mike?
Yeah, so at MCI, a lot of the agents are issued laptops and whatnot. They're supposed to actually keep laptops at their desk unless they have permission from their supervisors to work remotely from home. Working remote was a big thing during COVID, but not so much anymore. It's basically, hey, I'm sick. I don't have any leave days anymore. Mind if I work from home? And they'll just allow them to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a new policy right now. It was basically a lot less loose and regulated. And we had one agent. He didn't consult with his supervisor or anything. He just packed up his laptop and whatnot. Went on a road trip down to San Francisco, and his car got stolen down there because he had his laptops in his car.
Oh no!
Yeah, so he had to come clean and say that his car got stolen. There's some debate on if it actually got stolen or if he just misplaced it because they found the car in a parking lot a few days later with nothing stolen or nothing missing. But yeah, so the reason why he wasn't fired was because they couldn't prove that he did not get permission from his supervisors to take his laptops.
Oh boy, and that's what I'm talking about with your loopholes on policies. You got to be careful of those.
Yeah, so now it's mandatory that if you want to take your laptop away from your desk, you need to email your supervisor and get permission.
And there's always some person out there that is the reason for changes like that. Yes.
Yep.
Okay, knowledge check. The manager of your company is concerned that the finances are at risk because Jane, the accountant, is the only person in the organization that has responsibility over the money that goes in and out of the business. What policy should he put in place to ease his concern? Least privilege principle, separation of duties, non-disclosure, or acceptable use? Okay. Good job.
Take the money and run.
Did you have a question? Or are you just making a comment? Okay. So that's it for today. All right, so let me stop recording here.